Thank you all for joining us. We're still admitting a lot of people to the webinar, so we're just going to give it a few minutes to make sure we get everybody in the meeting.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. As we continue to add people in to our conference today, we'll get started in the expediency of time and your schedule. So I want to welcome you. First, I want to thank you for joining us again. And for those of you who have actively engaged our AEDY conference, we're thrilled. We had a wonderful turnout for day one. And for those of you, and we will be posting this information, but for those of you who had questions regarding whether or not other colleagues could sign on, absolutely. They sign on through Schoology, and if you need that information, we can push it back out to you, and we'll make sure that we post it in a number of different locations. So the AEDY conference information will remain up and posted through the end of April on Schoology, and you'll be able to access it. Everyone can access it right now by setting up their account through those directions. So again, we thank you, and you know, we appreciate your feedback as you begin looking at our AEDY content. Okay, so without further ado, my name is Gina Colarossi. I'm a member of the AEDY team. I'm also the lead consultant statewide for all things AEDY, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Jess Keener-Hawes.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, and so Jess and I today will pivot and go back and forth in terms of the slides and what information you will need to take away from today. We will make the PowerPoint available to you. And the good news is that Jess and I, either one of us will be your chairperson for your monitoring. So we are your primary points of contact. So let's begin with the patent mission. The mission of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of our local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. The Pennsylvania Department of Education has a commitment to the least restrictive environment. Our goal for each child is to ensure the individualized educational program teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. Okay, and so before I begin, I just want to do a quick housekeeping note. So what we would like to do during this time is that we have, you know, just over 100 of you that are on with us today, and the capture of those that are on with us today is for any AEDY program who was set to be monitored post March 13th. And so we have asked each of you through your AEDY programs and your teams, as well as the sending LEAs who send to those AEDY programs, to be actively engaged in this call. And as we go through each of the monitoring components and how we're going to accomplish this work for our cyclical monitoring, you'll see clearly, I hope, what the focus will be for yourself as a sending LEA versus the focus of those of you that are operating AEDY programs. So we want to thank again all of you for being here today. Jess and I are extremely grateful to be able to take this information to you and to be able to accomplish this during this time when we are not typical, I would say, in terms of our operation and our supports to the field. So AEDY monitoring, for any of you who were scheduled that second week in March through the end of May, we have moved your monitoring and you will receive a date for the week of, and we're beginning that process the week of May 4th. So if you were set to be monitored, let's say the week of March 16th, you can expect your monitoring to occur either the week of May 4th or the week of May 11th. So we have actively stepped in those monitorings through the beginning, the first part of May, through the mid part of June. Because we are operating this virtually, we will be conducting an administrative interview with those of you sending LEAs and AEDY programs during that week. So what we will be asking just logistically is for the AEDY programs to provide us with some dates and times during their scheduled week, and we will send out a Zoom meeting to account for the time period when we will spend just the AEDY program and the sending LEAs talking about the monitoring results. Because we're virtual, all content will be uploaded for the monitoring to the online management system with Leader Services. Okay, so as I had indicated, our monitoring process will obviously be completely virtual. The data entry will be completed by the sending LEA as well as by the AEDY program. I will outline further whose responsibilities are what and what access you have. And at the end of the presentation today, I've just provided some screenshots so that program and LEA can see where the information goes within the system. The good news is that the AEDY monitoring, now being virtual, will count towards meeting your cyclical monitoring requirement, which is once in every 3 years. So if you are being monitored in this next, May to June, you will complete your monitoring cycle. We will do a follow-up visit in fall when our buildings hopefully are open and everyone is ready to go, and it will count towards your 3-year cycle. Lastly, as a result of completing the AEDY monitoring, you will be asked to follow up with some corrective action and training plans, obviously into next school year, and will meet the duration of next school year as well, depending upon what corrective action is needed. Okay, so the chairperson, which I had indicated early on, is either Jess or myself, and the team members, which may vary depending upon the size of your AEDY program. If the program's a large program, we're naturally going to have a larger team that supports us virtually, and you will hear from either Jess or I directly in terms of the next steps for what you need to accomplish within the monitoring process for getting your information together. So the chairperson, we're responsible for coordinating that administrative interview that I spoke of and reviewing the facilitated self-assessment, which, if you were monitored, scheduled to be monitored that second week in March, you most likely have completed that in its entirety. The chairperson is also responsible for any coordination and assignment of the review of the work that's in the system. We're responsible for the input into Leader Services and to your reporting. as well as responsible for any review of within the upload section and completion of corrective action from the sending LEAs or the AEDY providers. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time here on our LEA and program responsibilities. Within the dashboard of the LEA, you have a section there where it will list any AEDY program that you have attributed within your application. So where it says L there, indicating that the LEA, you must complete the survey as it's attributed to the monitoring, the AEDY monitoring that we're completing within that provider. You may have more than one monitoring that's occurring as an LEA if you've selected more than one site. Next, we will be looking for contact information. Jess and I like to operate through our Excel spreadsheets, so we would be asking for that information in some table format from the provider so that we can ensure interviews and collaboration of any of the work that we're assigning and that will be completed within the system. The facilitated self-assessment, as I said earlier, if your monitoring was in March, you most likely have begun that process. In conversations with leader services, all of the facilitated self-assessments are open and will allow you to continue working on them. So we did have a couple providers who said, you know, we have since corrected this document. Can we go in and make that correction? Absolutely, you can. It's open to do so. Corrected rosters on the system. In the past, we have requested a separate roster from your in-placement roster on the system. What we're asking of you is when we pull the in-placement roster, we're asking to ensure that who is in placement is who is seated with you, that there aren't students who are in other captured points of the system in transition to you or in process, or better yet, not in the system, because all students effective this school year for our reporting to the Pennsylvania Department of Education as well as to the Department of Justice need to account for every student on the rolls. So when we ask you to correct your roster and verify, what we're asking you to do is confirm in the system that it is what is true and seated in your program. Next, we will be asking you to upload documents. And as I had said earlier, we will show you at the end of the presentation today how to go about those steps if you are the sending LEA and the special education documents for the student are not in the AEDY provider system. You will need to make sure that they are there so that the Bureau of Special Education can review them. Okay, so we will show you what that looks like. So you'll see there it says L for LEA and P for provider, that our expectation is that you follow the steps. And if you have a student who has an English, student who is an English learner and their plan needs to be uploaded in the section again that I'll put for the student record review later through the presentation. The provider will also ensure and upload the formal periodic reviews for the student. If they're not due for one, we would simply expect that the last one that they were due for would be there and in the system. Interviews, we're going to conduct these the same as we would when we're on site. So all interviews are captured in the system. And then we will be using that contact information that I listed above should we need to reach out and contact an individual teacher, counselor, or any other family member, student as a result of the reviews. And then finally, the application is part of the monitoring process. So if the application is currently with us to review, we will ensure that that review is completed and that you're steps closer to your approval.
Gina, I'd just like to interject as I'm reading the chats and people are sending me messages. If the information in the application in terms of contact is not up to date, you will not receive Zoom invites or any information that we are consistently putting out to the field. So I just want to again reiterate how important that information is to be updated in the leader system so that you get our information, anything we're pushing out to the field, and you're a part of any meeting that you need to be.
That's a great point, Jess. And if you know you're moving on, you're retiring, you know, you have, you're not going to be maybe in the position of AEDY, please indicate that so that we can ensure that the transition between you and the next person allows for that consistency. So there's not a cap in terms of, you know, who can have username and password to the system. We simply recommend that minimally there be two of you that have direct oversight to these processes because of the amount of follow through needed. Yeah, so thank you, Jess. I appreciate that. The facilitated self-assessment, for those of you who have completed it in other compliance processes with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, recognize that there are a group of questions that are divided out amongst each of the sections that are listed here: positive behavioral framework, complaints, English learners, students with disabilities, and our periodic review and exit criteria. Within each of these sections, on the online management system, you're to answer those questions in terms of policy, procedure, and practices of how you operate as an AEDY program, okay? In each of those sections, we will take a capture of that information and it will become part of our administrative interview follow-up if there's some section that's not clear to us, or if we'd like for you to elaborate on something that you know, is unique to you and your program, and we want to know more about that as the you know, as the AEDY consultants.
Sorry, Gina.
That's okay, we're good. Okay, so within the first section of the facilitated self-assessment, I wanted you to have somewhat of a checklist that you have to ensure that certainly you've answered all the questions within the facilitated self-assessment, but that you would know what, you know, what other documents and information was needed. So within the MTSS, we're looking for any evidence-based program documents you have in terms of your implementation of your positive behavioral framework. We are looking for your restraint log, and let's just say you as a program have not had any restraints this year. We want to see what your, you would simply put your procedure there, and you may, you know, some folks will even add in, this is how we document them, this is how we're reporting to the Bureau of Special Education and to our LEAs. So we're looking for that information behaviorally. Additionally, we need to see your counseling logs in terms of when and how you're providing counseling services. We would ask for you, if it's an individual student counseling record, for you to put that into the individual student record review and not within your policies, procedures, and practices within the FSA, because it's specific data and information to the student. And lastly, we would ask for your individual former periodic review documents, and by student, you have those in your placement file of your referral, which we're then able to see in our record review compliance monitoring process.
Gina, I'm going to jump in because I'm following the chat box and I'm trying to respond to people in real time regarding their questions. Some of the questions right now are, why are they being tasked to come to this webinar? It is because a site you listed as using as an AEDY provider is being monitored in the next few weeks. And therefore, as a sending LEA, as Gina mentioned earlier, you're required to participate in the compliance monitoring, inclusive of the administrative interview. So you have a comprehensive understanding of what they have submitted in terms of their application to meet all of the AEDY requirements. So every party needs to be involved in this process.
Right. So if you have an active contract with an AEDY provider and that provider is being monitored, this is the LEA's checkpoint with that AEDY program to ensure that you understand and have input towards and maybe even have some corrective action follow-up as a result of work that needs to be done. Know that your application is also evaluated during this time as a sending LEA.
Correct. And all sites were provided this information in the fall if they were to be monitored at any point this year. So
Yeah.
should answer the questions in the chat box for now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
During the facilitated self-assessment review, we will discuss with you whether any complaints had occurred during the course of the year and their resolve. We will review any materials related to communication with parents and families and students. And additionally, we will ensure that communication was shared in the student's native language, in the parent's native language. You know, again, in following certainly with the procedures and practices that we would expect all programs in schools to operate with, we're simply verifying that that information is fully accessible to our families and to our community.
We'll continue our review of the L plan. We'll review individual student EL plans, and then it will turn into individual corrective action if it doesn't meet the threshold of our guidance. We'll ensure that the students are receiving the services based on their individual L needs. The Bureau of Special Ed will review individual special education files. That is why we required them to be uploaded in the system. And we'll also be vetting and ensuring that manifestation determination meetings were held, and the determination was that it was not a manifestation of the child's disability, with the exception of serious bodily, weapons, or drugs violations. We'll review the individual student records based on their 45-day presumptive exit date. We'll be looking at the formal periodic reviews. We'll review all of the assessment data collected related to the goals. We put out in the conference yesterday the updated version of the formal periodic review, which it merges the three documents of the student's behavior plan, the formal periodic review, and the exit transition plan. We now have that sample in the leader system for your use should you decide to shift to the new model. And we'll review documentation of the periodic review in terms of exit and appropriateness, remembering that students may not remain because they do not attend or for any other reason other than not meeting their behavioral goal. The chairperson and the team members, we will review individual student files. We follow up with any interviews in terms of parents, students, teachers, as Gina previously alluded to, and we support the provider with coordinating all of this work. And in this virtual environment, we'll be working together readily to ensure that we have all the pieces necessary to meet compliance requirements. So before we come on site, we'll be carefully reviewing the application. As most of you have previously at least submitted the application once, we'll be providing feedback in all areas that don't meet the requirements of the settlement agreement, and working with you in terms of corrective action to ensure you have proper action plans in place, which outline training over the course of the next year. We'll be looking at your L services and supporting you in your L plan. We'll be providing any other feedback regarding your application, your handbook, support with your restraint policy, Any issues we found within the context of your application will work readily with you to support it to make it become compliant. Gina.
Sure. So I'll take it. So we have a question from the field right now. That's okay. And so I'd like to answer it because it's something that we had gone through prior, but it's good for us to restate now. So the surveys to parents and students remotely, if they were completed before, no problem. If they were not, the parent survey can be completed. It was always intended to be completed virtually via a cell phone. And so we have actively ensured the technology is effective in terms of being able to pull the survey up and complete those questions for us for the AEDY monitoring and submit them to us. So the responsibility of the AEDY provider is no different now than it was then at that time. The expectation is that that information be communicated to families so that they may do that. We will be talking individually as to how we're going to complete student interviews when they have not been done prior, because we will facilitate that communication alongside the families to ensure that we have information within the system in terms of that. To note, obviously our buildings are closed and they're closed to the remainder of this school year. And so when we return in fall to the start of the next school year, we will be setting an on-site date that, if absolutely necessary, that we do not have the data collected for some of our interview processes, we will be ensuring that that is completed at that time. And it's comprehensive in terms of our results. So as far as the parent survey, we want you to push it out the same way that it was expected prior, as well as with your staff interviews. All of those, access codes are still there, and we would expect that you communicate those to your staff and to your families. So as part of the pre-monitoring activities and what we will accomplish prior to your week of date, we will be doing a review of all your referrals that are in placement. We will be looking at the behavioral and what interventions were completed, as well as the reason for referral for the student being there. So pretty explicitly are the 6 reasons, and if anything is outside of those reasons, the follow through and requirement of the AEDY program and the LEA is to facilitate that student's exit and transition back to general education. Informal hearings must be documented by law, as well as the manifestation determination. And so if any of those areas are not completed or don't align, it will be through the monitoring process that that information will need to be corrected and remediated immediately. Okay, so the next few slides that we're going to address are actually system slides in terms of how the first 4 slides are in terms of how an LEA would access their uploads within the monitoring system. And this is something that came to us out of request just to ensure that all records were available to the virtual monitoring. And so you will see here with the first slide here, if you are an LEA and you're on your dashboard, you'll simply click on the monitoring uploads document section there. Okay, and that will take you to the next screen. Okay, that next screen will list any provider that's being monitored in this obviously for the rest of this school year. We haven't listed next year's yet. So if you have one site, maybe you have two, you will see the providers that are listed, and you'll select the provider. And then you'll see the list of students who are actively enrolled as well as anyone who's been actively enrolled in AEDY in that location that's being monitored, that AEDY program, through the course of this school year to date. And so the expectation of the LEA, if the AEDY provider that they have is being monitored, is that any documents that the AEDY team says, we don't have this here digitally, we are going to need you to put it there, whether that be the student's EL plan, student's 504, student special ed documents. You would simply click on that, that student in that section of action for view documents. And then it'll bring the next screen, which will then allow you to upload those documents. The great piece there is that it correlates the student's referral to the monitoring side of the system. So you can actively see in that top box there any document that was in the system for the student. And then in the gray box, you can simply upload the documents that the AEDY provider will need and we will need to review during the course of the monitoring. Okay, Jess, let's pause here a little bit. And, yep. And let's see if we have any questions or anything that we need to ensure that folks need to know before we move on to the next and the last step.
What time range is this for? The 19-20 school year?
So your back in fall, had you had an application in the system and you had selected an AEDY provider, you are now part of that AEDY provider's active monitoring because you have a contract with them for the provision of AEDY services. So you've been invited to this group because you're responsible for completing that LEA survey during this 3-year cycle, which is the 19-20 school year. So next school year, this group of AEDY providers will not be engaged in terms of the monitoring process the second year, and then the next year will be the third and final year for every AEDY program to have been monitored once during a 3-year cycle with documentation, including corrective action and training plans. So you're receiving this invite today and receiving this content because you're an LEA who is sending to an AEDY provider being monitored this year. So we'll continue on through the remainder of the slides and keep an eye on that group chat box. So the next piece, and it's a systems operations piece that needed to be added, was what we were referring to as advancing 45-day placements. And so for my AEDY providers, you know that you have had to individually, by student, by day, advance students forward in the AEDY process to account for their 45-day formal periodic review. And so we want to just provide you with these screenshots. If you were involved in our webinar last week, we walked you through this process at this time. Because this is highly individualized, LEA by LEA, and the decisions that individual LEAs made for the remainder of the school year to continue educational support for students, we needed to ensure that there was a method in the system to allow you by student to capture the date at which the student re-engaged, because that's when the LEA re-engaged educational time. And so we know that students effective March 13th, LEAs received closure notice from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. We also know that continuity of education plans were drafted and submitted, and that students began engaging in educational time with their respective schools and programs. And so what this 45-day placement process does for you through the monitoring is it lets you set straight where your 45-day review process is for each student by LEA. Okay, so what you have on the top left screen is the student listing, and then you'll see on the bottom right, you're going to be clicking on that student's placement screen. Okay, this is getting you into that placement screen to allow you to do the 45-day review. Okay, so then in the next screen for our referral for Joe, we will click on that view or modify presumptive exit date. Okay, and that will take you to the next step, which will then let you do one of two things. You may only need to manually move that student by a day. If that is all that's required to keep that formal periodic review in line with their presumptive 45-day exit, you'll simply select the top section and you'll enter that information the same way you have always done that for your school holidays and for your snow days and any other day that you needed to advance your reviews. The new section is in the yellow box, and that will allow you to move the student by more than one day in one click. And so if you decide you're going to use that yellow box, go ahead and click that link and it'll bring you to the next screen. Okay. And then the last screen here, what this allows you to do for the 45-day formal periodic review is put in the new date at which you need entered, and simply click the box below to register that date. When you do that, you will notice in your placement screen that the student's new exit date will be exactly what you have entered there in terms of your advancement through the number of days that you needed to as a result of the pandemic. Okay, and then here you'll see the final check here, which will allow you to see how many days that you have advanced the student by the yellow box, by the presumptive exit date for multiple days. And then you'll click that final box below that allows you to register all of that information into the student's placement and formal periodic review.
And that is
okay.
The presentation.
Okay. So Jess and I will be in touch individually with each AEDY program to ensure that the pieces of information that we need to see are there and in the system and ready to go for our team's review. We will also be requesting, if you have not already, as a provider, please give us your requested date for your administrative interview review. And Jess, I believe you and I will be operating similarly in terms of reaching out to each to make sure that that you have the information accurately addressed for us.
Yes, absolutely. Please, we will take another minute or two to check the chat box if there are questions, or you can feel free to reach out to us individually. We will be in contact with the providers. What if a student has been expelled for a year, but the presumptive exit date is incorrect?
So if there's an individual issue with a student's dates of entry or exit, That means that what was entered into the system by the provider was incorrect from the start. So the 45-day reviews continue even though the student is expelled for the period of, let's just say by example, year. So what you will be able to do is we will correct that information with you when we do roster checks and we're verifying that what's in the system is what's accurate in terms of what you have in paper. Okay, so you'll be able to reach out to your chairperson to ensure that that information in the system is correct.
I do want to make one final comment that if you haven't resubmitted your application since the summer or fall, please get that to the AEDY team, push submit on Leader. And if you have questions regarding that, please reach out to us and we'll support you to resubmit your applications. They do need to be approved by June 30. And our team is reviewing them every single day and we'll be providing you feedback so we can get you approved.
Okay, we thank everyone today for participating, and Jess and I will be in touch with the field on the next steps for our virtual monitoring, which will help us close out the year. Thank you. We appreciate your time and certainly your questions. Have a great day.
Thanks.